Earth Day is all about honoring and protecting the Earth, and we are really proud to say that we are powered 100% by renewable energy. Additionally, we've put a lot of effort into keeping the cave healthy, starting out by installing airtight doors when we first opened, and environmental monitoring systems such as items that measure temperature, humidity, and the evaporation rate, and we're super proud to say that things really haven't changed over time.
2021 is the International Year of Cave and Karst. We learned so much from caves and karst, from the weather patterns that can be predicted from stalagmites and stalactites, and from the many creatures that we found within the cave that are unique to this cave that potentially can provide cures for many diseases.
We really want to thank you for joining us tonight to view the Rocky Mountain PBS Colorado Experience episode on the history of the Fairy Caves. We also want to thank Rocky Mountain PBS for putting this incredible episode together. It's very special to us. And hats off to our employees and our friends that helped to make this happen.
So feel free to send your questions through Facebook or YouTube, and settle back, grab some snacks, and enjoy the show.
Cheers.
Cheers.
The original name of the cave system was the Fairy Caves.
They claim that it was the eighth wonder of the world, and I can understand why.
The echo of the cave, or the stillness of the cave, or the smell of the cave, it is magical.
It was formed 2.5, 3 million years ago.
Charles Darrow decided in 1894 to purchase the Fairy Caves to try to bring tourists to Glenwood Springs.
No one has found a diary or anything that shows why he closed the cave, but by 1915, they just stopped running tours here.
You know, when we bought this cave 20 years ago, there was about a mile of known passageway, and since then we've discovered another 3 miles of cave, and you know, I've been lucky to be in a lot of those discovery tours.
Caves to me are like another planet. You know, it's like a whole other world that you don't ever get to see.
This program was made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with additional funding provided in memory of Deanna E. LaCamera and members like you. With special thanks to the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, and to these organizations.
This is like going on the moon or going on Mars or being in an environment that most people don't experience. It was formed 2.5, 3 million years ago by the hot springs, the same hot springs that's down in Glenwood Springs.
The Fairy Caves of Glenwood Springs sit 1,400 feet above this picturesque mountain town. Perched atop Iron Mountain, they oversee a collection of natural wonders and man-made attractions that have drawn visitors to the town since the late 1800s.
In 1897, tours were given and people could pay 50 cents for a mule ride or a walk up to the caverns above the Hotel Colorado.
The early cave tours made headlines, but not nearly enough profit. The caves were closed to the public for decades and were almost lost to the elements and vandals.
People would break off stalactites, they would put graffiti on the walls, anything they wanted to do.
Now, unfortunately, in the 1800s, they didn't realize that it took so long to create formations, so it was very standard to break off little pieces of formation and take as souvenirs. So our upper cave has some cave formations that are broken.
The prehistoric caves were only discovered by Westerners in 1895. And if it hadn't been for a curious lawyer, they might have remained hidden.
Charles Worthington Darrow was 29 years old when he moved to Glenwood Springs from Wisconsin in 1886 with his young bride. He moved here to start a law practice.
He seemed to be very community-minded, like a lot of the people in the early days. I think he wanted to bring more people to Glenwood Springs.
He was up here in July and on horseback with his friend Horace Devereaux, and suddenly heard a strange whistling noise, and there was no one whistling that they could see. And so they followed it to its source and found a peculiar round hole in the rock, and the wind was blowing through it. Charles hired a force of men to come up here and dig it for him. So they went up and labored at the small hole, digging it open, pulling out rocks, etc., and broke into the part of the cave known as Fairy Cave.
We're not sure if Charles Darrow really was the first person to discover the caves, because the Ute Indians, this was their homeland. But actually he founded his company to give tours in the cave after he had purchased the cave in 1894.
The corporation became the Fairy Caves Company, and that was what ran this whole cave operation. There are theories as to why it was named that. Of course, in the 1890s, fairies were a big popular thing worldwide. That everybody talked about fairies. It was sort of a cultural phenomena at that time.
All we have is legend and stories that were passed down from different things. When it was first discovered in the late 1800s by Darrow, brought his daughter in, and we believe that when she came into the cave and saw all the glistening water droplets on all the formations, that she thought that they looked like fairies dancing in the candle lights that they had.
One year after Darrow opened the Fairy Caves for tours, the candle lanterns were extinguished to make way for something new. An invention that was introduced to all of Glenwood Springs by Charles Darrow's good friend, Walter Devereaux.
Walter Devereaux built the Hotel Colorado. The hot springs were developed, the vapor caves, as well as the electric plant. And so Glenwood Springs was one of the first communities in the United States to have hydroelectric power.
When Darrow opened up the Fairy Cave, since he knew the Devereaux quite well, he talked to them about running a wire up from the power plant to Fairy Cave. And so probably by the end of 1896, they had a wire run up the mountainside, and that allowed them to put in these Edison light bulbs throughout the tour route.
So for most of the people coming into that cave, the cave was not only the exciting thing to see, it was their first light bulb as well.
Darrow didn't stop there. From 1897 to 1900, he employed miners to work on their days off. They extended the caves 150 feet by digging and blasting through the mountain and onto a cliff.
Darrow had the idea that out on the cliff, overlooking Glenwood Canyon, there was a small cave in the middle of the cliff, and they felt that they could connect this cave through mining, blasting and digging a tunnel to that cave entrance. Eventually, in 1900, they had the gala grand opening of the exclamation point.
Exclamation Point still delights visitors to the Fairy Caves today with spectacular views of Glenwood Springs. But blasting through solid rock to a lookout point was easy, compared to Darrow's next idea.
In 1903, the city of Glenwood Springs was looking to put money into some sort of attraction. Darrow stood up and mentioned what we need to do is we need to put a tramway up the side of the mountain from Glenwood Springs to the Fairy Cave. But the city was like, no, that's too expensive, we don't want to do it. So right after that, newspaper reports start showing that Darrow would be going through a manager a year.
He did close the cave. It's hard to say exactly why. Maybe he wasn't making money. We don't have a record of that in historic records exactly why.
Sometime in the mid-1910s, the Fairy Caves closed to all but a few private explorers. It would be more than 80 years before the natural grandeur of the caves would be shared with the general public again.
I think it is a shame they were closed so long. It took someone with a dream and ability to bring that dream alive that really gave us what we have today in the Glenwood Adventure Park.
If we assume that the cave closed somewhere between 1910 and 1915 at the latest, it wasn't until 1951 that cavers with the National Geological Society started to come here. That entire period of time, the door was broken open to the cave, the gate, which kept people out. And through that era, lots of local residents, tourists would come up here. No tour guide, so it's sort of anything goes here. So at that particular point, Pete Preble and a few other cavers sort of pooled their money together, went to the descendants of the Darrows who still own the cave and said, we want to buy that 80 acres from you. They gave them a number and bought the property. This was about 1961.
Pete Preble had hoped to open the caves to tours just like Charles Darrow had done decades before. Although his plans never panned out, he was not alone in wanting to protect, yet share the caves. Word of the legendary caves atop Iron Mountain attracted a passionate caver and student at the Colorado School of Mines to see the caves for himself. He tracked down Pete Preble and started his campaign to reopen the caves.
I wrote him letters. I think the first letter he may have written back and said not interested. I called him a couple times and he was very standoffish. And I called him or wrote letters for the next 10 years to get some kind of response from him. And he just kept sending things back. 12 years later, we got this opportunity to go in the cave. I think that was in 93 or 94.
Denver resident and caver Steve Beckley turned that first visit to the Fairy Caves into a second date with the woman he would marry.
I'd only been in one little cave before and hadn't really known much about it. And Steve's like, hey, come on, we can get to, go into the Fairy Caves. Do you want to go? I'm like, well, of course, thinking I'm this, great caver because I'd been in a cave before. So we get there and the landowner immediately throws this waiver out in front of us, and it basically says, I'm too old to take you in the cave. If you don't come out, I can't come in and get you. Sign here in case you don't come out. It's not my fault. We're like, oh, lovely. So we signed everything. We're crawling on our bellies, and this cave was a lot tighter than I had ever been in before. So we're crawling, and all of a sudden, I get a little claustrophobic, and I'm like, Steve, and picture you're going in these caverns and these tunnels and you're on your belly and you can't see anything but feet in front of you. I couldn't really hear anybody and I'm like, Steve, I don't think I can go anymore. I hear his voice through the rock say, Jeannie, this is the worst part. If you can get through this, just keep going, breathe, keep going. You'll be fine after this. So I did, so I kept going. Well, then we got to a thing called the jam crack. And he totally lied because the jam crack was way worse.
After we got our first cave tour in here, then we started just kind of really pressing our relationship with Pete. He'd be living in this little tiny shed of a cabin all summer, and we'd bring him ice cream and sit with him and talk about the cave. And then he started letting us go in the cave by ourselves and going exploring. And finally, after, I don't know, there 5, 6, 7 years, he signed a contract that allowed us to lease the cave with an option to buy and then eventually buy the cave.
I remember back in 1998 getting a call from Steve at work with some good news, and it's like, oh, what's up? And he said, I just, purchased a lease on Fairy Cave.
the Beckleys turned to fellow cavers to help repair the damage done by vandals, create safe walkways, and add lighting to showcase the breathtaking formations that had been closed to the public for more than 8 decades.
We actually had to blast a tunnel into this room. It was a 150-foot tunnel to put in 2 airlocks, and we have cavers that put in all the wiring and all the lighting, so they knew where to step and how to walk and how to, care for the cave without impacting it. So we were very fortunate to have all this labor.
So the cavers offered us approximately 5,000 hours of free labor to get this cave open. Truly a labor of love, because who better to develop a cave than cavers?
On Memorial Day weekend, 1999, the Beckleys opened the caves for tours that were more impressive than ever before.
Initially, when these gave cave tours back in the late 1800s, and only one section of the cave was open, so it wasn't until 1999 that this new section of the cave was revealed to the public.
Our first year that we opened in 1999, we did approximately 30,000 visitors. And then we opened our first tram in 2003, and that year we did right at 100,000 visitors.
They had too much demand, and they couldn't get people up here in buses anymore, so they put a gondola in, a tram, and a restaurant. Well, now all of a sudden you've got more people up here than the caves can handle.
The cave tour lines, that's all our attractions were, so the lines in the cave tour were 2-3 hours long.
So we started to put attractions in, the first one being America's first alpine coaster that came over from Germany. And that was really just the beginning of what was going to be this adventure park, America's only mountaintop theme park.
So this room that we're standing in here now is called the pendant room. For these rocks up here called pendants, and they're actually formed solely due to airflow in the cave. All of the airflow in this cave originally had to go through a small hole in the back of this room. And so that's a lot of air from this whole cave system to move through that small hole in the back. Well, over the course of time, the force of that wind whipping through this room in particular was strong enough that it wore down the surface of the rocks up here, giving us the beautiful pendants that you can see today. And if you look right up here, this one right at the front here looks a bit like a rhinoceros charging out of the ceiling directly at you, with the horn right there and the bottom of the chin coming down right for you right there. And then if you look directly over here, we have a one-eyed octopus, eyes right there with all the tentacles swimming away over there.
The amazing sights the Beckleys helped reveal were formed millions of years ago, when Colorado was still underwater.
About 350 million years ago, there was a vast tropical seaway across most of the country. There were no mountains, there was no Colorado mountain ranges.
Those ancient oceans helped form something that's prevalent throughout the region today, Leadville limestone.
Miners worked what they call the Big Blue limestone, and that's basically the Mississippian-aged Leadville limestone, what we call it today. It's a very pure limestone through most of the state.
Rocks are actually soluble to a certain degree by rainwater, which is slightly acidic because it's got carbon dioxide in it, and the carbon dioxide mixes with rain and forms a weak acid called carbonic acid. Well, what happens to limestone when it meets acid is that it tends to dissolve a certain amount.
The ancient fairy caves were born of this dissolving effect, but quite unusually from a mixture of both fresh and mineral water.
So the unique thing about this cave was it was formed 2.5, 3 million years ago by the hot springs, the same hot springs that's down in Glenwood Springs.
So what you get when you have the sulfur springs mixing in with the oxygenated water from above is you end up with sulfuric acid, and then that dissolves out the cave system. And what it did was gave us really great colors too.
The type of formation that I really love is the cave bacon. It truly looks like big slabs of bacon that's marbled.
Bacon forms whenever water goes down a sloped surface. So you get layers and layers over time, and sometimes it's white and sometimes it looks like meat because of the iron in our cave.
The room we're in now is called the Barn, and it was originally called this from the original discoverers of the room, and it was because it was as big as a barn.
The barn is almost the height of a 6-story building and almost as long as a football field. And the smallest part you could drive like a small car through. And the lowest room that you go into is King's Row itself. It got its name because the formations reminded them of the chess pieces on the King's Row of the chessboard for the first explorers. And that is just a spectacular room, one of the most decorated in Colorado.
This has just got so many formations. Every square inch has a formation on it, and it's colorful.
So the Oscar in our cave, if you're standing at just the right angle, it looks a lot like the Oscar in the Academy Awards. In our cave, the growth rate is about a solid cubic inch, which I always tell people is like my knuckle to the tip of my finger here, in 1,000 years. And so the Oscar is getting consistently dripped on. It's probably still about a hair's width in a year on the Oscar.
A cave kiss is when the water from the ceiling drops and hits you on the head. You've been kissed by the cave, and it's good luck.
The glowing Cheeto, when we first started cave tours, we named that one the Howling Wolf because at an angle, us adults, we saw our Howling Wolf. But we do tons of field trips here as school kids. And so there's a 5th grade class here, and this one young man was hungry and he's looking at it and he says, to me, that looks like a glowing Cheeto. Those 2 big stalactites that are kind of grown together, that's actually known as our wedding platform. Steve used volunteers to help develop our cave, and 2 of those volunteers met each other while working in here, and they wanted to get married in our cave, so they actually got married right in front of those stalactites. And so the way they joined together, they felt symbolized their lives coming together in marriage, and so that's why we call that spot the wedding platform. The brain of the cave, the hot springs helped form our cave, and the bacteria helped with that. And that's actually a calcified bacteria colony up there, but it does look like a big old rusty brain on the ceiling.
There's also an 8-inch tall formation on the wall that looks a lot like a fairy. But the most intriguing creatures found in the fairy caves are even smaller.
We also have unique species that have been found only in this cave. And the one that I think is the coolest is the strain of bacteria that's used for cancer research. Pretty fascinating.
This cave has 54 unique species in it.
It's home to a variety of organisms that only live in this cave. There's different pseudoscorpions and trimophiles that live in complete darkness.
To preserve and protect all that the fairy caves have to offer takes constant maintenance.
We installed the airlock doors. We have mechanisms in the cave that measure temperature, humidity, and evaporation rate. And proud to say after 20 years, it hasn't changed much.
A living cave is high humidity, 98% humidity. Its temperature is maintained because of the earth temperature. This cave is 52 degrees year-round.
Steve and Jeanne feel very strongly about the educational value of it and the pristineness and the beauty of it and sharing that with the world.
Through their ownership, they're stewards of this cave. They're protecting it from further vandalism.
And sometimes, some of the really hardcore cavers are not happy with people who open up caves, but you have to have an opportunity to educate. We will never open up all of our cave, and there's areas that we don't even let cavers in.
The best way you can preserve a cave is completely close it off and don't let anybody in it. The second best way to preserve a cave is to commercialize it and build trails and to put some value on the experience. That way this cave stays in its pristine condition.
There's a lot of things, housekeeping, that we have to do in a cave. It's not a lot of fun when you're on your hands and knees with a shop vac sucking up hair and stuff on the sidewalks, but it has to be done. That's what's best for the cave.
In 2019, the Beckleys added a new, faster gondola to access the Glenwood Caverns Adventure Park. And Glenwood Springs chose the mountaintop theme park to announce it would become just the 7th city in the United States to be powered entirely by renewable energy.
Cheers! Woo!
Another first for the fairy caves, a magical place that helps preserve the past while embracing the future.
The legacy is that it's actually open now and available for people. And if we can keep it really pristine, which we've done for the last 20 years and continue to do going forward, you know, it'll be a legacy for our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, and anybody else coming after us will have the ability to come in and have the same feeling that we have today, which is really amazing.
Just in the last 20 years, you know, the cave has gone from 7,800 feet to nearly 4 miles of passage, which means that that there's a very good chance that there's much more yet to be found. It's sort of like we're maybe a quarter of the way through the movie of this cave's history, that future generations will look upon the decisions that Darrow made in the past, what Pete Preble did in the 60s through the 90s, and what the Beckleys are doing today. And so all these owners are sort of leaving their own imprint on this cave. And as future cavers come here, they'll use hopefully new tools and new ideas to find passages that we don't know how to find at this point.
I think the legacy is really when you develop something, whether it's a hot spring or a cave or whatever the attraction for other people is, that you can do it the right way. You can do it in such a way that you preserve the cave, in this case, and still have a lot of visitors come and see it.
The kind of beauty that's under your feet, that's under the earth, that you don't even know about, that's kind of hidden. And I think that is what's one of the special things about it.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the show. We're real excited to have you here, and we do have some questions that oh, here they are. Thank you, lovely assistant. So, here are some of the questions. The first one was actually, how often do you clean the caves? So, we are constantly cleaning the caves. There's people in there all the time, getting underneath the stairs, getting dust out of things, and then once a year we do a big cleaning. We're really deep cleaning. We get in a vacuum and really get all the dust and lint out of the cave, and we want to make sure that the cave is protected. Oh, okay, sorry. Second question, how did COVID-19 impact your business, and what did you do to protect your guests and employees? So this has been an amazing year between COVID-19 and then the fires that shut us down for a couple weeks. It's been 2020 was a very interesting year, but we managed to get through it, and we kept our employees on staff through the whole time. We were closed for 85 days during COVID and another 13 days for the fire, but we're back and open, and actually people seem to be very excited to come back and see the caves. It's something to do outdoors and enjoy the park. So.
I get to do one.
Yes.
Okay. What were some of the things you found when you were first cleaning out the cave before you reopened it? We found all sorts of treasures that Mr. Preble had stored in the cave. The one that's probably most notable that I remember is we found a bunch of these weather stations that used to go up in hot air balloons, and for some reason Pete collected them. Our best guess is he would go to government auctions and want to buy one thing, but he'd have to buy a whole lot of them. So he had like hundreds of what else?
Yeah,
we found
tons
lots of stuff.
So that was the Pete relics. So we had all the stuff from when the previous owner of the cave stored stuff in the cave, but then we found some historic stuff. We found stuff from the original lighting system from Darrow. We found light fixtures, we found wiring, we found old bottles, so a lot of historic stuff from the turn of the century. So there was a lot of stuff that we found in the cave.
We found pack rats too.
We found a lot of pack
that
rats.
That was kind of cool.
Oh, that's the question here. What kind of animals live in the cave? Pack rats, bats, and then there's 53 or 54 unique species that live in the cave. Anything from springtails, which is kind of like a shrimp that lives in the little ponds, to pseudoscorpions that when you see pictures of them, they look like really monstrous things, but they're only about a half an inch long. So we have all sorts of critters within the cave.
I'm going to add one thing to that. You know, one of our first trips into the cave, a gentleman by the name of Lyle Moss brought us down into the barn in Kings Row, and what I remember is he brought us to a little pool of water that actually, it had this little critter in it, like a little fish of some sort, and when we shined our light on it, it was completely white and it didn't have any eyes. And it was the wildest thing I'd ever seen. And he explained to us that some of the creatures that live in complete darkness don't need to have eyes, and that was really cool.
Yep. So when did you decide to start adding theme park attractions? So we opened the tram in 2003, and we soon realized that the cave was just not able to handle the crowds, and so there was a lot of wait times for the cave tours. So we put in our first attraction, the Alpine Coaster, in 2005, and that just started off a string of adding additional attractions, and now we have 12 attractions that people enjoy riding up here at the park. And then also going into the cave. The cave is actually still our #1 attraction. So
let's see. Oh, what is your favorite ride in the park? My favorite ride is the giant swing. And if you haven't been on it, I highly recommend it. If you're an adrenaline junkie at all, the cool thing about it for me is that I've been on it probably 100 times. And every single time, it completely takes my breath away. I mean, I think it's one of the few times anywhere that you can swing out over this cliff and look down and just hang there for a minute and then swing back, and it's really, really, really cool. Now, Steve's favorite ride.
So I will not ride the swing, and I will not ride the Haunted Mine Drop.
He likes the giddy up.
No, I like the Alpine Coaster. That's a good ride. Giddy Up is a kiddie ride, but I do like it. But the swing and the Haunted Mine Drop are just a little too intense for me. So I'm happy to admit that I'm kind of scared.
Okay. Do you have a favorite part of the cave? My favorite part of the cave is a room called Kings Row. Because it's one of the most highly decorated cave rooms in the whole state of Colorado. But I think one of the reasons it's one of my favorite parts is when we were first exploring, early days before we had tours or anything, the way to get into Kings Row, we actually had to get on our butts and slide through this really narrow space from the ground to the roof and slide through, and then you popped out into Kings Row. And that was the most incredible thing, to come in complete darkness and get on your butt and slide through and put your lights on and see all these beautiful formations. So that's why that's my favorite part. And people can see it on the walking tour, on the regular tour right now, so it's really cool.
I agree that Kings Row is a wonderful part. I also do like what we've done in the fairy caves, the other part of the cave, which we actually took some of the lighting from Darrow from the 1800s and mimicked the how they lit the caves in the turn of the century. So it's really an interesting way to see the cave through a different type of light.
Let's see. Well, here's a good one for you. Has anything new been added since this show was made?
Yes. So there's we've added our local troll. So this troll appeared one morning. He'd come out of the cave. His name's Halvor, and he lives on the surface and greets kids and lets them sit on his lap and take pictures. And he's a very friendly troll. And he showed up and is sharing the experience with families that come and visit us. Currently, we're building a new food and beverage operation called the Smokehouse, which will add smoked products and fresh burgers off a grill, and so we're excited about having a new smokehouse. On top of that, the smokehouse has many new restrooms, which is wonderful to have in the park.
Oh, how do you protect the cave with all of those people going in and out?
So like we said in our introduction, there's been over 2 million people that have been through the cave. And when we first developed the cave, we were very cautious of the airtight doors and monitoring the humidity and the temperature and the evaporation rate. So we really take great care to make sure that the cave is not drying out and that it continues to thrive and have the many species that grow in the cave. So we've done all these things to make sure that the cave is staying the same pristine shape as when Jeanne and I crawled into it 1994, 27 years ago. So, and I'm glad to say that the cave is still in great shape.
That's all for
I think
these.
that's
I think
all
there's
the,
one
hold
more.
on, we have one more. What is done to protect the 53 individual unique species in the cave? So these species this is the only place in the world these critters are found. Most of these have been found deep in the cave in lakes that are not on the tour. Matter of fact, they're a long ways from the tour. We only allow cavers to go there one time and to film or to map. And so we really limit the people that can come go see it. Now, pseudoscorpions, some of the ones that you see throughout the cave, they're on the cave tours, but they're also deep in the cave. So there's a good species, a good population of pseudoscorpions. So we're definitely doing a lot of things to protect the areas where these creatures are and to protect the creatures. Thank you guys for such great questions, and we really enjoyed sharing this show with you today, and we hope you come and visit us and see what we have to offer.
Yes, thanks so much.
Talk.
So what do you
What do you do?